You know the feeling before you even name it. It is a quiet exhaustion that settles into your bones. You wake up tired, not because you lack sleep, but because you are carrying the weight of a conversation that never actually happened. You replay moments in your head, wondering where you went wrong, what you could have said differently, how you missed the warning signs. You start doubting your own memory. You apologize for things you did not do. You shrink your needs so they take up less space. And still, it is never quite enough. You are not imagining this. You are not too sensitive, and you are not the problem. What you experienced was a slow, steady imbalance. It was a dynamic built on control, not connection. It was shaped by someone who needed you to carry the emotional weight so they could remain untouched. When you are in that space, clarity does not come all at once. It comes in fragments. A strange comment here, a sudden coldness there, a rule that changes the moment you try to follow it. You try to make sense of it because you care, because you believe people want to be understood, and because you trust that effort should lead to closeness. But in this kind of relationship, effort is not the path to closeness. It is the path to exhaustion. The truth is much simpler than you have been told. You were not dealing with a person who simply loved differently. You were dealing with a pattern that operates quietly. It does not announce itself with loud arguments or obvious cruelty. It moves through subtle shifts, small corrections, and quiet expectations. It thrives on your willingness to adapt, your desire to fix, and your natural tendency to take responsibility. And once you see how it works, you stop blaming yourself. You start seeing the structure. The first thing you will notice is the way expectations keep moving. You do everything you can to meet a standard, to be reasonable, to keep the peace. You follow through. You show up. You try to be clear and fair. But the moment you think you have it right, the standard shifts. Something that was acceptable yesterday is suddenly a problem today. A tone you thought was fine is now labeled disrespectful. A boundary you set is treated as an overreaction. This is not about communication breakdown. It is about control. When someone cannot tolerate being held to a consistent standard, they will quietly rewrite the rules. It keeps you focused on adjusting yourself instead of noticing what is actually happening. The psychology behind it is straightforward. A person who relies on external validation but fears being seen clearly will avoid accountability at all costs.
If they stay fixed on a rule, they can be held to it.
If they keep the rule fluid, they remain in charge of the narrative. The effect on you is a slow erosion of confidence. You begin to second-guess your own judgment. You work harder to anticipate what will be asked of you. You start believing that if you just try a little more, things will finally settle. But they do not settle, because the goal is not resolution. The goal is to keep you engaged in the effort. Once you recognize this pattern, you stop trying to predict the next shift. You stop treating every change as your fault. You begin to see that consistency is a basic requirement of healthy interaction, and when it is missing, the problem is not your inability to keep up. The problem is the design. Then there is the quiet dismissal. It does not always look like anger or obvious cruelty. Sometimes it looks like a sigh, a slight pause before answering, a gentle phrase like, "I guess you just feel that way," or, "You are taking this too seriously." It sounds mild, but it carries a heavy message. Your experience is being minimized. Your reality is being gently pushed aside. This is not about disagreement. It is about emotional hierarchy. When someone dismisses your feelings without engaging them, they are protecting themselves from the discomfort of genuine empathy. True empathy requires them to sit with your experience, to acknowledge it, and sometimes to adjust their behavior. That is risky for someone who needs to remain emotionally untouched. So instead of engaging, they downplay. They frame your needs as unreasonable. They label your clarity as sensitivity. They make you feel like you are asking for too much when you are simply asking to be seen. The impact is a deep sense of isolation. You start censoring yourself. You hold back your thoughts before they even leave your mouth. You wonder if you are making a big deal out of nothing. You begin to doubt your own emotional compass. But your compass is not broken. It is being quietly recalibrated by someone who benefits from your silence. When you step back and look at the pattern, you see that healthy people do not need to minimize your reality to feel secure. They can handle your feelings without treating them as a threat. They can disagree without dismissing. They can say, "I see why you feel that way," even when they do not agree. The absence of that basic respect is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of their capacity. And capacity is not something you can fix by trying harder. Another sign is the unpredictable warmth. You will notice that the connection is never steady. There are moments of intense closeness, sudden praise, or unexpected kindness. Then, without warning, it pulls back. The tone cools. The attention shifts. You are left wondering what changed, what you missed, how you lost their favor. This is not random. It is a psychological pattern known as intermittent reinforcement. It works the same way it does in any conditioned response. When rewards are unpredictable, the brain becomes hyper-focused on earning them again. You start analyzing every interaction. You replay conversations. You look for clues. You adjust your behavior, hoping to trigger the warmth again. You become emotionally invested in the cycle because the high moments feel like proof that things are getting better. But they are not getting better. They are being used to keep you engaged. The psychology here is simple. A person who fears genuine intimacy will offer connection in small, controlled doses. They give just enough to keep you close, but not enough to build real security. They maintain the upper hand by deciding when closeness happens and when it ends. The effect on you is a quiet anxiety that becomes your baseline. You learn to live in a state of waiting. You start believing that love is something you must constantly earn through perfect behavior. But love that requires performance is not love. It is management. When you recognize this pattern, you stop treating the cold periods as your punishment and the warm periods as your reward. You begin to see the whole cycle as a system. You stop chasing the warmth. You start noticing the absence of consistency. And in that stillness, your nervous system begins to quiet down. You remember what steady feels like. You remember that connection should not leave you guessing. Then there is the subtle blame reversal. It rarely comes as a direct accusation. It usually arrives wrapped in confusion or disappointment. You express a concern, and instead of addressing the concern, the focus shifts to your reaction. You set a limit, and suddenly you are the one being called rigid or unkind. You ask for clarity, and you are told you are creating drama. The conversation moves away from the original issue and settles squarely on your response to it. This is a common deflection strategy. It works because it triggers your natural desire to be fair. When someone frames your reaction as the problem, you instinctively step back to examine yourself. You wonder if you came on too strong. You check your tone. You consider if you were unfair. In doing so, you take ownership of a conflict that was not yours to carry. The psychology behind this is a fragile sense of self.
A person who cannot tolerate internal discomfort will project it outward. Shame, guilt, or insecurity is too heavy to hold.
so it is handed to the person who cares enough to pick it up. The effect on you is a chronic sense of responsibility for things you did not cause. You start apologizing for having feelings. You start smoothing over tensions that belong to someone else. You lose track of where your boundaries end and their discomfort begins. But boundaries are not meant to be negotiated by someone else's emotional state. When you see this pattern clearly, you stop absorbing blame that does not belong to you. You stop treating your natural reactions as flaws. You begin to understand that healthy accountability means addressing the action, not weaponizing the response. You learn to say, "I hear your perspective, but I am not taking responsibility for your discomfort." And with that simple shift, the weight lifts. The final sign is the quiet isolation. It does not always look like cutting people off. Sometimes it looks like gentle discouragement. You mention a friend, and they imply that person does not really understand you. You talk about family, and they suggest they are too dramatic. You share a success, and they remind you that not everyone can be trusted. Slowly, your support network shrinks. Not because you stopped reaching out, but because you started filtering who is worth your time. You begin to believe that this person is the only one who truly sees you, or the only one who can handle your truth. That is not intimacy. That is consolidation of control. When someone isolates you, they remove the outside voices that could reflect reality back to you. They create a closed system where their narrative becomes the only reference point. The psychology is defensive. External relationships introduce unpredictability. They offer alternative perspectives. They provide emotional safety that does not depend on performance. For someone who needs to remain the center of your emotional world, that is a threat. So they gently distance you from it. The impact is a slow loss of perspective. You start doubting your friends. You feel guilty for wanting time apart. You believe that choosing this person means leaving everyone else behind. But healthy connection does not require abandonment. It does not ask you to trade your support system for their approval. When you recognize this pattern, you stop treating isolation as proof of devotion. You begin to see it as a red flag for emotional dependency. You gently rebuild your connections. You allow yourself to have conversations outside the relationship. You let other voices remind you of who you are when you are not being managed. And in doing so, your clarity returns. You do not need to prove any of this to anyone. You only need to see it clearly for yourself. When you look at these patterns together, they form a coherent picture. The shifting standards, the quiet dismissal, the unpredictable warmth, the blame reversal, the gentle isolation. They are not separate behaviors. They are parts of the same system. A system designed to keep you engaged, questioning yourself, and emotionally invested. It does not work because you are weak. It works because you are human. You care. You want things to make sense. You believe in effort and fairness. Those are strengths, not flaws. They were simply used against you. But awareness changes everything. Once you see the pattern, you stop trying to solve it from the inside. You stop asking what you can do differently to make it work. You start asking whether it should be working at all. You step back. You observe without reacting. You let the silence settle. You stop chasing explanations. You stop trying to earn what should already be given. This is where your power returns. Not in loud declarations, not in dramatic exits, not in proving them wrong. It returns in quiet detachment. It returns in the simple act of refusing to participate in a game that was never meant to be won. You begin to set boundaries that do not require justification. You stop explaining yourself to people who benefit from your confusion. You protect your energy instead of spending it on proof. You learn that calm is not indifference. It is clarity. It is the understanding that you do not need to fight for your reality. You only need to live it. Healing does not happen all at once. It happens in small, steady choices. It happens when you stop rereading old messages looking for hidden meaning. It happens when you notice your body relaxing because you no longer have to prepare for the next shift. It happens when you realize that peace is not something you have to earn. It is something you allow. You will still have moments of doubt. You will still wonder if you overreacted, if you missed something, if you could have handled it differently. That is normal. Your nervous system was trained to stay alert. It will take time to unlearn the habit of bracing for impact. But you are no longer in that space. You are rebuilding your internal baseline. You are remembering what it feels like to trust your own mind. You are practicing the simple discipline of not taking responsibility for someone else's emotional management. You are allowing yourself to want relationships that feel steady, respectful, and clear. You are giving yourself permission to walk away from dynamics that require you to shrink. And in doing so, you are not closing yourself off. You are opening yourself to what is real. You do not need to figure everything out today. You only need to keep choosing clarity over confusion. You only need to keep choosing yourself over the illusion of control. The truth is already inside you. It has been there the whole time, waiting for the noise to settle so it could be heard. You are not broken. You were just caught in a pattern that required you to doubt your own worth. Now that you see it, you can step out of it. You can breathe. You can move forward with quiet strength, knowing exactly what you deserve, and knowing that you do not have to chase it. You only have to recognize it, claim it, and live it. And from this place, everything else will begin to make sense.